This is Tom Fox. Welcome to the newest edition in the Compliance Podcast Network, my latest podcast, Compliance and Coronavirus. As the voice of compliance, I wanted to start a podcast which will help bring both clarity and sanity to the field of compliance, the compliance practitioner, and indeed the compliance profession during this worldwide health and healthcare crisis. Taking up a variety of topics as diverse as working from home, to sporting events, to the role of the board of directors, to crisis management, to the role of supply chains. We will look at all of these in this podcast. If you have a topic you'd like covered on compliance and coronavirus, please let me know. I'd be happy to do a podcast on it. In this episode, I'm joined by Vin DiCianni, founder and CEO of Affiliated Monitors, and we take a look at some of the problems and potential solutions to employees working from home and being isolated, and also the use of ambassadors in your compliance program for remote areas to more fully operationalize your compliance program going forward. Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox back again for another episode. Today, I have with me Vin DiCianni, founder and president of Affiliated Monitors. Vin, first of all, welcome back.
Hi, Tom. How are we doing today?
Good. Vin, I've had the chance to visit with you in the past, but now we are in mid-August in the coronavirus health crisis. I had thought that we would be moving into a greater reopening in Q3 and Q4. And now I've come to the conclusion that this is not going away, and this is going to be the way things are going into the future. And so with that sort of background, I was wondering if you might be able to share with us some of the things not only you are seeing right now that you and your colleagues and your clients are having to deal with, but also instead of asking you about Q3 and Q4, I may ask you about 2021 and where we're going to go with that. So maybe with that, what are two or three of the top challenges you, the team, and more importantly, the people you are working with have right now?
So what we're seeing, from the vantage point of isolation, and we are all isolated, is staying connected. And I know you've heard that, and people talk about it in that sort of that general sense of just staying connected with people. But I'm seeing it, and we're seeing it in a couple of different ways. And it's again, it's here for the foreseeable future. And for compliance folks, I think it's a great challenge. And I'm going to talk about sort of people working remotely, and that might be people from headquarters working remotely. But more importantly, entities that have subsidiaries that are really remote and having those people work remotely. When you think about it, I see it as sort of two or three great challenges. One is just the idea of isolation. The fact that people are still connected and identify with the company. You know what I mean? And I think that is sort of ingrained, yet they're working in different environments, which creates different challenges. I've been talking to lots of people who have families now at home and their kids, and they're trying to educate them. And so they're distracted, from the regular business. Sometimes they're educating their kids during the day and trying to do their work at night. And so the focus gets lost a little bit, I think, on compliance and or just the norm of working in an ethical environment because of those challenges in terms of isolation. That's number one. The next one is just this lack of direct connection between the individuals who are remotely located. And again, if you use it and just take it out, remotely located from remote locations, who are, again, not intimately involved in compliance. It's compliance that comes by once a year, like an annual training, and that's their compliance, involvement in a given year. Those are the people that I think are most at risk because they are not part of the culture to any great extent, other than getting their annual training, and so that's the second issue. And then the third is compliance folks communicating with those people who are remotely located. And what we see way too often is communication by email. And email out to the masses, wherever they may be. And it's a great message, and it's well-intentioned by the compliance officer. It's beautifully composed. And it is assumed by the compliance officer that it's reaching people, and that they're opening the email, and that they're reading the email, and that their lives are changed by the email, and that their behavior is going to change by that email. And it's I think it's a false assumption that people are opening the emails and then reading them and absorbing them. I think that if you really asked people in the field, and we have, and we're still doing this through our focus groups that we're doing with our clients, they're still not opening the emails, and they're not getting the message. And so there's this disconnect in terms of communications that I think has just been exacerbated by this current the current, working environment. People are not necessarily getting connected back to the home base. And I want to blame email. And again, I think it's sort of that mixed bag. You want to send out the message. You want to make sure you're touching everybody. It is a message that you have to send out universally, but people aren't getting it. So what we have seen, if I can try to address some of these issues quickly, is compliance team can't rely on email. It just has to be more personalized touch, and now more than ever. And you got to build in, and I don't care if it's every day or once a week, team meetings, personal email, personal communications through phone calls, Skype calls, Zoom calls. That's the only way you're going to touch people, where you can see them and you're hearing from them and you're getting responses. Sorry about that. And you are hearing that they're on top of things. And I think that that's a very broad way of saying that the communication effort right now has to be improved, and it goes across companies. Even personally with my company, one of the things that I have done since March is, and we're not a big company, but I talk to everybody on my staff every 2 weeks. And I make it a point, even if it's just a 10-minute conversation, to say, hello, how you doing? Let's talk about this. What's going on? How's the family? And here's something that I'm thinking about. What do you think? Very important. And I don't know if you're hearing that from other compliance officers around the world, but that communication piece right now with the isolation is crucial.
You know what I found most interesting about your observations, Vin, is March 15, April 15, the conversation was, we're working remotely. And now August 17, at the date we're recording this, these are the specific problems. These are the issues that we have identified. And literally from isolation, from lack of direction because of working remotely, and not failure in communications, but perhaps insufficient communications, all have arisen as problems. But they're all, I think, things that can be addressed.
I do too. Yeah.
And you spoke about that direct communications. I've heard others talk about they still have a daily Zoom team meeting, or at least every couple of days, and they force that connection. So it's really interesting that what was perceived to be one problem in March, in August now you just identified three, and there are probably many more we could talk about. So it's interesting to see this evolution. Well, now, Vin, if we could maybe change the focus a little bit to that veiled land of the future, 2021. And one of the things that I've really come around to thinking is this is the new normal.
Yeah.
And as we move from things that we used to talk about in terms of disaster recovery to business continuity to business as usual, what are some of the things that you see down the road that we are going to be doing on a very regular basis because of COVID-19?
Well, sticking with this notion of people working remotely and that continuing, and it might be another year, Tom, when we're still doing this a year from now. I think that compliance officers can't get out and do training. They just can't. They're not going to do it. And they can't visit remote locations. And so one of the things that I think is going to be a very important consideration that compliance teams need to recognize is this whole idea of ambassadors and the cascading kind of messaging that is crucial to get out. Compliance officers and compliance teams for a lot of companies are relatively small. And they might have, thousands of staff people working out there. And it's them and their 2-3 deputies, right? I do think that the notion of having somebody in the remote location who is more of that, I'm going to call it an ambassador for lack of a better word, but you know what I'm talking about. Just somebody who is the compliance officer representative out there, be it in, Singapore or in, with a company headquartered in New York, Tampa. Just having that somebody that the compliance officer can reach out to into that remote location, who is the ambassador that is either echoing the message that the compliance officer is pushing out or is sending out the message that the compliance officer is pushing out. We talk about ambassadors when the company is really sort of dispersed across the globe. But it's such a good idea right now for compliance officers to be thinking about that. And it takes what is sometimes, as we know, sort of siloed compliance, and it brings it out because these ambassadors might be working in HR. They might be working in the factory, on the factory floor as a manager. And it expands the compliance team's reach as needed right now. And it does two things. It takes the compliance and the corporate message out into the field. But the other thing it does is it's giving the feedback back from the field back to compliance. And that's huge. I mean, just getting the temperature of what's going on out there by having an ambassador who's on the ground and is talking to people on a regular basis is crucial for information, for feedback, back to the compliance team, which then can work its way up. But I think that's crucial as we go forward. And not enough companies do that. I think some companies that have created ambassador programs really understand it and how beneficial it can be. Others have not taken that step, and they're still in a silo. So that's my thoughts for where we can go.
That sounds to me a lot like fully operationalizing your compliance program by driving the compliance messaging to literally the front lines. But the second part of that many, I think, compliance professionals don't think of is that feedback.
Absolutely.
And now we have that feedback. And if I could overlay the 2020 update to the evaluation of corporate compliance programs, where the DOJ said it's continuous monitoring and continuous improvement based upon information. And you don't get any better information than those on the front line.
Absolutely. One thing that we do as a company, and I think you and I have talked about it, is we work with some companies proactively. They're not in trouble. They just wanted the independent assessment. And so what we will do is on a regular basis, we'll visit a remote location. Now it's a little bit different, and we can still do it, via Zoom, but visiting remote locations to get that feedback, that sometimes the compliance is not getting, through the independent. It really works. And it's amazing how the company benefits from hearing from its people and from its people hearing, from it through the eyes of an independent. So it really does work. And I do think it's going to be something that's going to be needed, as we move forward into 2021.
Well, Ben, unfortunately, we are near the end of our time for this episode. I wanted to thank you again. And perhaps as we move into the fall or even 2021, I might call upon you for some thoughts on where we might be at that point in time.
Absolutely. Always good to talk to you, Tom.
Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox again. I'd like to thank you for listening to this episode of Compliance and Coronavirus. This is the only B2B podcast which brings clear and sane information for both the compliance professional and a business executive. If I could ask you to do one thing, if you could tell one person about this podcast, I'm trying to get the word out about this most unique podcast in the Compliance Podcast Network. So if you could tell one person about it, send them a copy, send them a link, do something to help me publicize this podcast, I would greatly appreciate it. Compliance and Coronavirus is a production of the Compliance Podcast Network, and it appears Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday of each week. Thanks again for listening, and I hope you'll join me again for another episode.